Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the musical introduction of this commemoration conference was presented by students of the Ypres Academy of Music and Word. Exactly 100 years, the world has changed. For the first time in world history, chemical weapons have been used in warfare when Germans attacked French, Canadian and Algerian troops with chlorine gas by surprise. This happened here, some miles from this place, on the territories of the actual towns of Ypres and Langemarck-Poelkapelle. The mayors of these both communities are welcoming us. May I draw your attention, please, to the welcoming words of Mr. Jan Dunley, Mayor of Ypres.
Excellenties, mevrouwen, heren, hoogwaardigheidsbekleders, collega's, dames en heren. Toen 100 jaar geleden op die zonnige 22 april 15 om 17 uur hier in de Westhoek de gaskranen werden opengedraaid en het giftige chloorgas over de vijandelijke linies dood en ellende verspreidde, kon men amper bevroeden dat op dat eigenste moment de loop van de geschiedenis zich wijzigde. Het onderscheid tussen militairen en burgers vervaagde in oorlogssituaties. Het chloorgas, later het fosgeen, het mosterdgas en andere gifgassen sleurden iedereen die ze langs hun weg ontmoeten mee in de neerwaartse spiraal van pijn en tragiek. Veel onschuldige slachtoffers vielen te betreuren, en niet alleen op 22 april, maar bij elk later gebruik van dit nietsontziend wapen op talrijke plaatsen in de wereld, bij talrijke conflicten. Oorlog werd nog meedogenlozer en ontzag niemand meer. Onze streek werd de geschiedenis ingecatapulteerd als de plaats waar chemische oorlogsvoering voor het eerst op grote schaal werd toegepast. Later werd de naam van deze stad Ypres vereenzelvigd met het mosterdgas, dat in 17 in deze streek werd losgelaten, het Yperiet. Het is niet iets waar we trots kunnen op zijn. Integendeel, het maakt ons nederig en treurig. En toch mogen wij niet zwijgen. Steeds weer komt het onmenselijke leed dat deze vorm van oorlogsvoering met zich meebrengt voor de geest. En jammer genoeg werd sedertdien nog ettelijke malen in diverse vormen en omstandigheden naar dit wapen gegrepen, wanneer de conventionele oorlogsvoering te weinig perspectief bood. Onze stad heeft de opdracht om steeds opnieuw de ogen te openen en deze opdracht willen wij blijven vervullen. Volgende maand is het precies 30 jaar geleden dat Paus Johannes Paulus II in deze stad een opdracht meegaf. Hij was het die op onze grote markt dringend en in duidelijke bewoordingen heeft opgeroepen om voor de vrede te ijveren. En ik citeer: Ypres is het symbool geworden van het onmetelijke leed dat een oorlog met zich meebrengt en tevens symbool van wederopbouw, van vrede. Vrede is een plicht voor ieder van ons. Het is niet langer een vraagstuk dat kan behandeld worden op retorische wijze, louter aan de hand van goedkope en eenzijdige slogans. Diepe overtuiging en totaal engagement zijn nodig. Einde van het citaat. En ook daarom blijft de stad zich inzetten als vredestad. Talrijk zijn de engagementen die wij als bestuur hebben genomen, talrijk ook de initiatieven die wij hebben gesteund, moreel en financieel. Maar deze taak is niet af en soms blijft het deprimerend om te zien hoe weinig en hoe traag de mensheid leert, hoe op verschillende plaatsen gestreden wordt, soms met de wreedste wapens. En toch blijft het waard om verder te doen. Om soms met de moed in de schoenen signalen uit te sturen dat oorlog nooit winnaars oplevert, dat de mensheid beter verdient. Activiteiten zoals gisteren, de verklaring van Ypres, hier onderschreven door de 190 lidstaten van OPCW, de Organisatie voor het Verbod op Chemische Wapens, die de Conventie van Genève uit 1997 controleert en waarover momenteel een tentoonstelling loopt in de Kazelat. Maar ook en evenzeer de internationale conferentie die hier vandaag begint. Zij leren ons dat onze vredeswil door velen gedeeld wordt. Bijna 7000 burgemeesters in 160 landen hebben zich verenigd in de wereldwijde vereniging Mayors for Peace, om van daaruit de boodschap uit te roepen. En die boodschap is toch werkelijk heel belangrijk. Mayors for Peace stelt: wij willen geen doelwit meer zijn. Onze steden en gemeenten willen niet aangevallen worden met massavernietigingswapens. Het is voor ons dan ook een hele eer u allen te mogen welkom heten ter gelegenheid van deze academische zitting met de duidelijke oproep als titel: een eeuw massavernietigingswapens genoeg. Want we willen niet alleen dat de focus gelegd wordt op chemische wapens, maar ook op de biologische, ook op de nucleaire wapens die moeten verwijderd worden, geweerd worden uit de wereld. Tenminste, als wij onszelf het predicaat beschaafd met enige waardigheid willen dragen. Ons stadsbestuur is dan ook vereerd dat u naar Ypres bent gekomen om samen te herdenken en na te denken over een betere, veiliger en vredevolle toekomst. Ik wens u allen een vruchtbare conferentie toe. Dank u.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was between Steenstraate and Strijdboom, halfway between Langemark and Poelkapelle, that the bottles with chlorine gas have been digged in, waiting for the most convenient moment to release the deadly content in the direction of the enemy. The inhabitants of Langemark and Poelkapelle were amongst the first civil victims of the deadly gas. I may introduce the Mayor of Langemark Poelkapelle. Mr. Alain Wiffels, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a quiet and sunny day, the 22nd April in 1915. Although some shells have fallen in Ypres, only an occasional explosion or short burst of machine gun fire had disturbed the monotonous routine of daytime in the trenches. It seemed to be an ordinary day in wartime, but it wasn't. It was almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon when the frontline German commanders in the Ypres salient gave the signal they have waited a long time. Open the gas containers. The men of the Stinkpionier put on their masks, bent over the cylinders, adjusted the long nozzles that would carry the gas into the wind, and wrenched open the cocks that would be released. Between Steenstraate and the IJzerkanaal, over Langemark and Poelkapelle, where 5,730 cylinders opened and 180 tons of grey-green chlorine gas started its way to the hostile trenches. The first victims were French and Algerian soldiers. 2 days later, 2,000 Canadian soldiers lost their lives in the northeast of Ypres by the chlorine gas. The wind has done its work, and the surprising attack with the unknown weapon created a 7-kilometer gap in the Allied line. However, the German infantry were also wary of the gas, lacking reinforcements failed to exploit the break. This was the start of a dreadful episode in the history of mankind. War turned into an exercise in mass destruction, where the weapons injure both soldiers and civilians without distinction of guilt or innocence, without any respect for the individual. This is a scandal for humanity and is a cause of deep shame. We pay tribute in grief and with respect to the many across the world that since then have been victimized with chemical weapons. From the fields of Langemar, Kulkapelle and Ypres to Halabja, the Iran-Iraq conflict, the Gaza conflict in Palestine, and the terrorist attack in the Tokyo subway, those dreadful arms were extensively used prior to the entry into force of the Chemical Weapon Convention. The suffering victims were not just young soldiers, but also innocent children, elderly, and other civilians. This conference is not only an event of commemoration, but also a conference of hope. We are here committing ourselves to a future free of chemical weapons. This is a considerable challenge and work to do by all of us, by the political leaders to open the minds and create the atmosphere and acceptance in the several countries, by the technicians to create the good conditions to destroy in an acceptable way the existing chemical weapons. But we are confident that we will succeed. And we may be proud that the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has been awarded with the Peace Nobel Prize for the efforts in keeping the world chemical weapon free. Together with my colleague, the Mayor of Ypres, I welcome you all in Flanders Fields and I wish you a valuable conference. Thank you.
I welcome the representative of the German government, His Excellency Ambassador Eckhard Kunz. Ambassador Kunz was born in Mannheim and studied law at the universities of Heidelberg and Freiburg. After finishing his doctorate at the University of Hanover with his thesis on soldiers' loyalty to the Constitution, he joined the Foreign Ministry. He served his country in diplomatic posts in Afghanistan, Malaysia, Angola, Brunei, Iran, and Turkey. In Brunei, he was, at the age of 34, the youngest ambassador ever to represent the Federal Republic of Germany abroad. Since August 2011, he is ambassador in Brussels. Mr. Kunz, I invite you to take the floor.
Meneer de gouverneur, geachte heren burgemeesters, excellencies, distinguished representatives of the International Red Cross, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I also welcome wholeheartedly my colleagues from so many other countries present here today. It is a moving experience for me to have been invited to address you today. I'm the ambassador of the country that invaded Belgium twice in the first half of the 20th centuries. So there's a big number of other countries. I've been invited to speak to you after all that has happened, after all the suffering that Germany, my country, brought to Belgium and other countries in the First and Second World Wars, and which began in 1914 with Germany's attack on neutral Belgium. Today, we are united in the Belgian and Flemish town of Ypres, in a town in the outskirts of which 100 years ago, German troops used poison gas on a large scale for the first time as a weapon of war. The horrors of the so-called Great War, which would become the first of two dreadful world wars, reached at that point a new, terrible dimension. During World War I, the area around Ypres was the scene of a gruesome 4-year trench warfare between German and Allied troops. And the town of Ypres was totally destroyed during the war. Many were evacuated, and today, once again, I learned that the family of the two brothers, Brainer, present here, was evacuated, I think, in time before the gas attack, whereas other civilians in Ypres and Langemark suffered also from the gas attacks. 2014 was the year of the commemoration of the beginning of the First World War. And in 2014, the Federal Chancellor Angela Merkel visited this town of Ypres twice and paid tribute to the numerous victims of World War in Belgium at the Mennen Gate. She also spoke at Newport. And the German Federal President Joachim Gauck participated in the International Remembrance Ceremony in Liège to mark the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War on August 4th. He visited afterwards, together with King Philip, the city of Leuven, and he went also to the military cemetery, Saint-Cyprien, near Mons. Geachte Herr Burgemeester Dönitz, laat mij u mijn bewondering betuigen voor hoe origineel, trouw en met wreke toewijding uw burgers na de Eerste Wereldoorlog de stad Ypres gebouwd hebben. Al in de jaren 30 was er niet meer veel te zien van de destructies die er met name de Duitse troepen tussen 1914 en 1918 hebben toegebracht. Geachte Herr Burgemeester Rivers, ik dank u ook hartelijk voor uw grote inzet voor het onderhoud van het militair begraafplaats, de Duitse militaire begraafplaats Langemark. We hebben elkaar al vaak ontmoet, omdat ook 2 van mijn ouderen daar begraven zijn, die in de Eerste Wereldoorlog bij Hollebech in de eerste Ypres-slag sneuvelt. I can state not only members of my family fought and also died in the First World War here in the Flanders fields. I have just learned also that an uncle of the brothers Brainer was fighting on the Belgian side. Luckily, as I understand, he did not die. And also my deputies, Michael Häusler, 2 grandfathers were fighting the First World War here in the Flanders fields, surviving the war. Ladies and gentlemen, and the burgemeesters, at various times, we together pay tribute to the numerous victims of World War I. And I especially appreciate that we always could do it together. Former enemies, those who fought on the Allied side, those who fought on the German side, commemorating the horrors of the wars. 100 years ago today, the German troops, however, crossed a new threshold of horror in the way in which they used chlorine gas on a large scale in the Second Battle of Flanders. It was the German chemist Fritz Haber who made it feasible to use chlorine gas as a weapon of war, and the German military command, with its soulless military logic, which lost sight of standards of civilization. The new weapons caused appalling suffering. Many soldiers died an excruciating death, and many were left in anxiety, fear, and helplessness. And not only soldiers, many civilians were victims of the gas war. In the course of the First World War, poison gas was unfortunately used later on by both sides. During World War I, around 100,000 soldiers died from the effects of the deadly substance, and more than 1 million were injured through poisoning and burning. It is therefore all the more significant that my country, Belgium, and all countries present here, the vast majority of countries throughout the world, are committed to the objective of a worldwide ban on chemical weapons. The foundations for this objective were laid by the Geneva Protocol of 1925, which bans the deployment of poison gas in war, and the Chemical Weapons Convention entering force in 1997. Around 190 signatories of the Chemical Weapons Convention, including those countries represented today, are strongly committed to helping to achieve the universality and full implementation of the Convention. Only a few countries have not signed it yet. This day should be a stark reminder to those countries that they should sign the Convention without delay. Nevertheless, and it was said before in the speeches, the threat of chemical gas warfare is present still in many places of the world. Syria, a concerning example, and also the latest news from Syria, which gives us great concerns on the use of chlorine gas against Syrian civilians again, is very disturbing. Germany will continue to support all efforts of the international community to achieve a world free from chemical weapons, and eventually to hold those accountable who are responsible for the use of chemical weapons, as expressed by the states party to the Chemical Weapons Convention in their IPA declaration yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, the millions of victims of World War I and World War II remind us that peace in the world and in Europe is not to be taken for granted, but is the responsibility of us all. We can meet our responsibility through a joint culture of remembrance and reconciliation, and an open view of the future. After the Second World War, started by my country, it was Belgians who were amongst the first to offer the hand of reconciliation to their German neighbors, recognizing the young Federal Republic of Germany. Since then, Belgians, Germans, all other European and non-European friends have built up a close friendship, which we Germans value very highly. It is therefore all the more appropriate that Belgium hosts so many of the activities of the European Union institutions. The EU is the biggest and most successful peace project in our history. It represents a civilization founded on humanity and freedom, on democracy, international law, and peaceful balancing of interest. It is our common task to safeguard these precious values and also to defend them on the world stage together with our friends and allies. Thank you for your attention. Danke.
His Excellency Mr. Bernard Valero is since 2012 the Ambassador of France in Brussels. His diplomatic career passed by Dublin, Havana, Quebec, Madrid, Washington, Barcelona and Skopje before he became French ambassador in Brussels. Since then, Ambassador Valero has shown much interest in the commemoration of the First World War and became a familiar face in our city of Ypres. We are happy to welcome him today. Ambassador Valero, you have the floor.
Mesdames et messieurs, autorités civiles et militaires, chers collègues du corps diplomatique, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité à prendre la parole à l'occasion de cette conférence pour ce triste anniversaire que nous commémorons aujourd'hui. C'est difficile pour un ambassadeur de France de prendre la parole aujourd'hui à Ypres. Difficile parce que on se souvient que parmi les premières victimes de ce gaz utilisé ce jour-là, c'était des soldats de l'armée française qui étaient morts, étouffés, ne pouvant plus respirer, ne sachant pas ce qui se passait, n'avaient jamais eu l'expérience de cette arme. Et je voudrais être très clair, quand je parle des soldats de l'armée française, je parle de ces soldats qui venaient de Normandie, de Bretagne, de Provence, de Paris, du nord de la France. Et je pense également aux Algériens, aux Sénégalais notamment, qui étaient dans les rangs de l'armée française à l'époque. Et puis c'est également difficile parce que c'est une partie de, comme le disait, le rappelait également l'ambassadeur d'Allemagne tout à l'heure, une partie de notre histoire familiale, personnelle, que nous retrouvons ici, dans cette terre de Flandre. En ce qui me concerne, j'ai eu de la chance, puisque mon grand-père, qui servait dans l'armée française et qui était engagé sur le front des Flandres, avait eu la chance, l'extrême chance, d'être gravement blessé 3 ou 4 jours avant, à quelques kilomètres d'ici, de Ypres, et n'avait donc pas connu cette première attaque du gaz. Et puis c'est également douloureux de parler de cet anniversaire parce que cette utilisation du gaz dans un conflit, c'était évidemment une grande première, mais ça soulignait combien l'imagination de l'homme, de quelque côté qu'il soit, était infinie pour découvrir chaque jour des moyens d'anéantir l'adversaire, parce que nous avons eu l'invention et l'utilisation du gaz de combat, mais au même moment, on inventait et on utilisait les tanks, au même moment, on inventait la guerre sous-marine, au même moment, on inventait l'armée de l'air. Toute cette imagination de l'homme au service de la destruction, au service de la mort, cette addition d'inventions mortifères n'est vraiment pas à l'honneur de nos peuples, de nos sociétés, et ne fait pas honneur à notre histoire. Le problème aujourd'hui, c'est que lorsque l'on parle du gaz, il y a 100 ans, c'est pas simplement un souvenir horrible que nous évoquons, mais nous parlons également d'une réalité, c'est-à-dire 100 ans après, de la poursuite de l'utilisation de cette arme de destruction massive. Le dernier exemple que nous avons eu, c'était en Syrie, il y a quelque temps. Cela montrait que la barbarie est toujours présente sur notre terre. Alors à partir de là, se pose la question pour la communauté internationale de quoi faire pour empêcher. Alors bien sûr, nous avons mené au cours des 30 dernières années une action diplomatique internationale très intense pour arriver à cette convention internationale sur l'interdiction des armes chimiques. Et c'est un progrès considérable, mais pas suffisant. Parce que d'abord, un certain nombre de pays n'ont pas signé cette convention, et deuxièmement, parce que signer des textes pour interdire quelque chose que l'on continue à utiliser peut paraître insuffisant. Et à partir de là et au-delà des accords que l'on peut signer à Genève, à New York, à La Haye, il y a un engagement véritable de la communauté internationale qui doit se mettre véritablement en route pour interdire la production, pour interdire l'exportation, pour interdire la dissémination et naturellement pour interdire l'utilisation. Lors de ce tragique exemple syrien tout récent, la France était prête à prendre ses responsabilités dans cette affaire, mais il est évident que dans de telles situations, c'est une action collective qui est indispensable, et donc nous ne sommes pas allés au bout de notre logique. Et c'est ce à quoi il faut également que nous réfléchissions tous ensemble, mais au-delà de la réflexion, il y a des moments dans l'histoire où nous devons faire face à nos responsabilités et nous devons agir. Et je crois que la conférence d'aujourd'hui, le souvenir terrible de ce qui s'est passé ici, il y a 100 ans, doit nous rappeler collectivement à nos responsabilités. Je voudrais dire pour terminer quelques mots personnels à mon ami Eckart, l'ambassadeur d'Allemagne. Je l'ai écouté avec beaucoup d'attention. Je connais bien ce collègue allemand parce que cela fait maintenant très longtemps que lui et moi, nous nous retrouvons dans des cimetières, dans des commémorations, devant des monuments de souvenirs. Et je voudrais lui dire combien j'ai apprécié la dignité avec laquelle il a représenté son pays dans ces circonstances. Je voudrais également lui dire combien, en ma qualité d'ambassadeur de France ici en Belgique, j'ai travaillé main dans la main avec lui à ce devoir de mémoire. Pourquoi ? Eh bien, tout simplement parce que lui et moi, nous avons une responsabilité particulière. Nous sommes les héritiers, l'un et l'autre, de ces Français, de ces Allemands qui d'abord se sont entretués, combattus, ont voulu s'anéantir il y a plus d'un siècle, et ça se passait ici, notamment en Flandre. Mais nous sommes également les héritiers de ces Français, de ces Allemands qui, dans les années 50, ont eu suffisamment d'intelligence, d'une part, pour arrêter de se faire la guerre. 3 guerres en moins d'un siècle, on a pensé que c'était peut-être un peu excessif et qu'il fallait arrêter. Mais qui sont allés plus loin, qui ont eu l'intelligence aussi de dire qu'au-delà de la paix, il fallait peut-être se réconcilier, c'est ce que nous avons fait. Et au-delà de la réconciliation, il fallait peut-être aller un peu plus loin et travailler ensemble sur un idéal supérieur qui transcende les égoïsmes nationaux, c'est-à-dire la construction européenne. Et je voudrais dire à mon collègue et ami Eckart aujourd'hui combien j'ai apprécié ce travail que nous avons fait ensemble. Ce n'était pas simplement un travail de mémoire, ce n'était pas, ni pour toi ni pour moi, simplement un hommage rendu à nos grands-parents, à nos familles, mais c'était également un exemple que nous avons donné. Et cet exemple franco-allemand que nous avons donné ici, nous l'avons fait d'autant plus facilement que ça s'est passé en Belgique. Que ce soit à l'est du pays ou ici, nous avons toujours été, toi et moi, accompagnés par nos amis de Wallonie, de Flandre, quelles que soient les circonstances, dans ce travail que nous avons fait ensemble. Et je crois que le moment est venu aujourd'hui, après les commémorations intenses de l'année dernière, que les ambassadeurs de France et d'Allemagne disent tout simplement merci à leurs amis de Belgique pour les avoir accompagnés dans ce travail partagé de mémoire, parce que peut-être que sans nos amis de Belgique, nous ne serions pas nécessairement arrivés à un tel résultat aussi exemplaire. Merci beaucoup.
I have the honor to welcome now the Minister of National Defense of Tunisia, His Excellency Mr. Farad Horkani. Mr. Horkani is a doctor in law and holds a PhD on the law faculty of Dijon. He was university's professor in public law, director of the political sciences department, vice dean of the faculty of law and political sciences in Tunis, expert in, amongst others, regional integration, institutional issues and human rights, before he became, in February of this year, Minister of National Defense. It is a great honor for us to have Minister Horkani here today, and I am happy to invite him to take the floor.
Bonjour mesdames, mesdemoiselles, messieurs. Je voudrais avant tout vous remercier vivement pour cette invitation à un événement très important, bien que triste. Excellences, mesdames, messieurs, je voudrais pour vous dire que c'est avec la plus grande émotion et la plus profonde compassion que j'assiste aujourd'hui ici, à Ypres, non seulement à mon titre personnel en tant que ministre de la Défense nationale de la Tunisie, mais également en tant que représentant de mon président de la République, M. BGP Sepsi, à la commémoration du plus emploi de l'arme chimique, reconnu comme tel il y a déjà 100 ans, contre 10 000 de soldats qui ont succombé sur le front un certain 22 avril 2015. Je commence tout d'abord par vous adresser mes remerciements et celles du gouvernement tunisien pour cette invitation, qui constitue pour moi non seulement une occasion pour rendre hommage aux âmes de mes soldats compatriotes qui ont péri ici, à Ypres, et qui y sont enterrés, mais également une opportunité d'échanger nos perspectives par rapport au thème de cette conférence internationale que vous avez bien pris le soin d'organiser, et c'est une excellente idée. Nul ne peut songer aujourd'hui à nier cette réalité cruelle des souffrances humaines causées par ce genre d'armes. Nul ne peut lésiner par ailleurs sur les moyens pour une prise de conscience internationale par rapport à la gravité de l'emploi de telles armes aux retombées ravageuses. Certes, qu'il s'agisse de cercles académiques spécialisés, d'institutions militaires elles-mêmes, devenues plus avisées des souffrances constatées, ou de toutes les forces vives de chaque nation, cet agrégat d'efforts consentis par la communauté internationale devrait cumuler la synergie nécessaire pour dissuader quiconque à employer dorénavant des armes de destruction massive. J'en prends à témoin ce cimetière Saint-Charles-de-Boutise, le plus grand cimetière militaire français en Belgique, qui tire d'ailleurs son nom d'un poste de secours installé à proximité par les troupes françaises dans l'école Saint-Charles lors de la première bataille d'Ypres, où gisent des Tunisiens, alors tombés dans le champ d'honneur, suffoqués par les gaz mortels. Les instances internationales et à leur tête l'Organisation des Nations Unies n'arrive toujours pas à éradiquer le danger des armes de destruction massive, qu'elles soient nucléaires, chimiques ou bactériologiques, puisque les réalités politiques et la situation internationale n'offrent pas de créneaux sérieux pour atteindre de tels objectifs. L'Organisation des Nations Unies s'implique particulièrement dans le désarmement multilatéral en incitant les États membres à élaborer de nouvelles normes et à renforcer et consolider des accords existants. Mais je viens au plus important de ma réflexion. Et je pose une question, disons, redoutable, et qui nous concerne tous aujourd'hui. Si des terroristes se dotent de cette arme chimique ou de toute autre arme de destruction massive, en profitant de la multiplication des foyers de tensions et conflits locaux et régionaux, très permissibles à la fuite et à la vulgarisation de telles armes. Comme vous le savez sans doute, mesdames, messieurs, il y a quelques jours déjà, le 18 mars 2015, la Tunisie vient de subir une attaque meurtrière qui a ciblé le musée national du Bardo, abritant la plus grande, la plus belle collection de mosaïques romaines dans le monde. Plus d'une vingtaine de personnes, entre touristes et nationaux, ont trouvé la mort. Les blessés se comptent par dizaines. Et 2 seuls terroristes, 2, ont pu causer un tel carnage. C'est pour dire l'urgence imminente pour la communauté internationale, et pour nous en particulier ici en Europe, et au-delà de l'Europe, d'entamer un effort réel pour venir à bout de ce fléau qui se propage et sévit de façon extrêmement dangereuse. Si le terrorisme réussit à mettre la main sur les armes de destruction massive, nul ne peut se hasarder à en estimer les dégâts. L'attaque chimique d'un groupe terroriste perpétré dans un métro japonais en 1995 et la série de cas d'affection humaine aux États-Unis en automne 2001 ne peuvent que soutenir cette possibilité et dénoter de l'acuité du problème. Le choc psychologique qui résulte pour la population civile sera sans doute sans aucune mesure avec ce que nous avons connu auparavant. La position de mon pays sur le sujet est claire. Les États ne peuvent en aucun cas faire face tout seuls au risque des armes de destruction massive, ni aux dangers liés au terrorisme, ni à la conjugaison des deux. La coopération internationale est non seulement quelque chose d'utile, mais plutôt un impératif. Elle s'impose à nous. Elle s'impose à tous les pays, grands et petits, du Nord et du Sud. À ce titre, mon pays déploie des efforts considérables contre la promotion de cette idée de démarche coopérative dans ses dimensions régionales et internationales. Mon pays, comme vous le savez tous, mesdames, messieurs, qui vient de sortir d'une transition démocratique, qui a réussi à mettre sur pied une constitution qui a des qualités indéniables, qui a réussi à préparer des élections transparentes, libres et honnêtes. Mon pays est concerné par cet événement. Et pour ne plus revoir le drame d'Ypres du 22 avril 1915, nous devrons œuvrer tous dans cette perspective où nos intérêts se rencontrent, surtout entre le Nord et le Sud, et le Sud, entre tous les pays du monde, entre l'Europe et la Méditerranée. Et je vous remercie de votre attention.
We welcome now His Excellency Ambassador Tibor Tolt, who assumed the function of Executive Secretary of the Preparatory Commission of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, CTBTO. Since more than 30 years, Mr. Todt was actively involved in international disarmament and non-proliferation issues. He is a Hungarian career diplomat who served as permanent representative of Hungary to the United Nations and other international organizations. He was also ambassador at the OPCW in The Hague, and from 1994 to 1996 he served as the Deputy State Secretary of Defense. Between 1992 and 2004, he chaired the Biological Weapons Convention negotiations on an implementation and verification regime. He is a man with innumerable merits on the front of disarmament, and it is a great honor to us to invite him to take the floor. After Mr. Todt's intervention, we can listen to a musical intermezzo by the students of the Academy for Music and Word.
Distinguished mayors, Mr. Minister, Madam Deputy Director General, Madam Vice President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first of all, thank you so much for bringing me over here today. It's a privilege to be here. I have spent decades in my professional career dealing with nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. But still, it is sobering to visit this place. This is not the first time I'm here in a personal capacity. I visited Ypres and the surrounding places a couple of years ago. And this is a place where one will have to probably talk his mind, talk from the heart, not just from the mind. So I will try to talk from my heart and not just making the usual points which we normally do about weapons of mass destruction. In a way, I do not want to talk about weapons of mass destruction today. I am concerned, and because I'm concerned, I would like to talk today about the war, potential war of total destruction. And I do not want to look back upon the last 100 years, but I would like to look into the future and to talk about the next, let's say, 100 months, and to address the issue how really we respect those who gave their life at Ypres and at so many places, and we really live up to the no more, which has been repeated so many times in history. Let me start with making a step aside. There is a book which is from a totally different area. It's called This Time is Different. It's about financial calamities. It's about how those financial calamities are happening again and again and again. The subtitle of it says, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly. And for the first time I was reading that book, what came to my mind is that whatever is relevant for ignoring signs of oncoming challenges, and ignoring signs of what is called bubbles in the financial world, in all area of security, we are repeating the same folly. The folly of war, not for 8 centuries, but probably for 50 centuries, more than 5,000 years. And when I was more carefully paying attention to some of these bubbles which are described in that particular book, and it's describing the banking and the currency crisis and the defaults and the employment crisis, and how all these different crises are coming together into a crisis in plural. then I realized that probably B, C, D, E, banking, currency, default, and E, would need another letter as well, and this is A, armaments. Somehow it came to my mind that it's not just that we are ignoring calamities on the horizon or close to us, but practically some of these calamities are coming together. And A, standing for armaments and arms race and arms conflicts, are quite frequently coinciding with the other calamities. So what I will try to do is, and this is the humble effort of a diplomat, is to connect the dots, or connect the bubbles, and connect the dots again in a concerned way, where I will make a point that there might be a super bubble in front of us, and because of that we have to be vigilant. And I would like to make the point about some of the bubbles to spot that they do not burst. And I would like to make a final point about how to deflate those bubbles, because I don't think we are without any hope in front of those challenges. Yes, we have to act. But let me start with paying tribute to the more than 1 million victims of the use of chemical weapons. Chemical weapons used here in Belgium, in other parts of the world, be it during the First World War or later on. And I would like to use the background which was created by the forceful speeches of the ambassadors of Germany and France to say that what is needed is, in one word, reconciliation. And I will come back to this notion. How to have a reconciliation in our hearts, in our minds, politically, not just in parts of Europe, but in a much wider context. On the cycles and on the bubbles, I would like to put in front of you a bigger picture. And again, for historians, it might be the wrong way of connecting the dots. First World War, 20 million dead, another 20 million wounded. And then, not much later on, the Second World War, and altogether 100 million people dead, and hundreds of millions affected by the war, probably the whole world. For many historians, these are not two wars separate, but it's a continuum. It's a continuum where practically the first half of the 20th century was wiped out for generations. It's very much true for the security, it's very much true for the well-being. Yes, countries and continents were destroyed. But what we are probably not always doing to see what is the link between these events. And if we take that it was a downward wave in the history of not just Europe but the whole world, the question to be asked is, what was behind it? And can it happen again? And this is where mankind and people are normally positive and optimistic. So all of us are saying, this time is different. Bad things happened at those times, to those people and in those places. It cannot happen to us. And if you look upon this phenomenon of the first 50 years of the 20th century being wiped out, and if you go beyond the security arena, then you might, and many of us recall, that prior to the First World War and prior to the Second World War, there were malfunctioning signs of the economies, dysfunctionalities, volatility, disequilibrium. And there was a notion of not just the banking and the currency and the defaults and the employment affecting countries and economies, both prior to the First World War and Second World War. But all these phenomena creeping into a different sphere, what is called sometimes the social sphere. I would call it the national or collective psyche. So all these difficulties created feelings of inequality, loss of faith and frustration. They created governance dilemmas and problems. And unfortunately, they created hatred as well. Hatred expressed in nationalism, and later chauvinism, and later leading to the extremes. One cannot disregard that the letter A, armaments and arms race and arms conflict, were happening in a context, again, of economic and financial downturns, severe depressions, repeated challenges, and it brought up these ugly faces of the collective psyche I mentioned earlier. I call them the E and the F and the G and the H, E standing for equality, F for face or frustration, G for governance, and the H standing for hatred. The first half of the 20th century was very much impacted by all these letters related to security, the economic financial sphere, and the collective psyche. And fortunately for us, probably since the late 1940s, these, what I call big bubbles, did not come back and did not haunt us in a way as they were haunting us collectively. Of course, the forces of extreme still was very much around. And yes, Europe found peace with itself only somewhere in the late 1980s. The bubbles coming together so forcefully in the first 50 years of the 20th century is posing a question. And the question is, was it a unique phenomenon? There were tensions which superseded any previous tension in terms of the potential of destruction. 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis is one example. The period of the early 1980s, let me choose 1983 as a peak of it. For many who follow nuclear issues, this was probably one of the moments in history when we were all collectively pretty close to mass annihilation. In both the Cuban Missile Crisis and in the early 1980s, what was at stake, hundreds of millions of people. It was the gas of General Secretary Khrushchev back in 1962, 500 million. In 1983, because of the increase of the nuclear arsenal, it was much more than that. At that time, in 62 and 83, an unprecedented tension was less accompanied with the other areas showing that much of a crisis overburning. What I am concerned about and why I am trying to chart a wave, a cycle in front of you, is that in the other elements which played such a critical role prior to the First World War and prior to the Second World War, we are seeing certain bubbles. And I would like to spot some of those bubbles. I don't have the time because of that. Some of the points sound like oversimplification. But bubbles which after a long period are bringing about the notion of an unfortunate super bubble when issues of armaments and arms race are fueled by the dysfunctionality of the economies and the frustration and the hatred generated as a short-circuiting of some of the problems. The difficulty is if it is becoming a triple bubble, security, economy, and the collective psyche affected. And the bubbles to spot for me, unfortunately, we have to recall for Europe what is the foundation of Europe. I would like to pay tribute to the Franco-German reconciliation, and I would like to pay tribute to Schuman and the Schuman Plan, which became, of course, possible only with partners on the other side, Adenauer, and those who helped this political initiative to become a reality of the 1950s. The Schuman Plan was based and remains as a core basis for reconciliation as a result of pulling together countries. Putting together countries, yes, through bringing under one roof war-fighting commodities. It used to be coal and steel in the early 1950s. It became nuclear energy later on in the second half of the 1950s, but economic integration as well, an ever-increasing economic integration. And this economic integration is not for the sake of economic integration, but this economic integration is at the heart of a Europe at peace with itself. And this is where the coherence of this European-wide infrastructure is so important. And this is the angles through which we will have to look upon whatever is happening with the euro, whatever problems are collectively faced in the context of the Greek financial crisis, or whatever is happening in referenda or other political poll-taking in the months or years to come. But it's important that the EU proper, and of course here I would like to add the Atlantic side as well, the US and Canada, because of the historical ties, retains this notion which was underpinning the Schuman Plan, the notion of reconciliation and integration. There is another bubble we have to watch and spot very carefully, not to let it grow. And this is in the eastern part of Europe, the crisis and the war in Ukraine, and the role Russian Federation sees for itself. And as for reconciliation and as for integration, of course, it's important to find a path where historically, many times, there was a no said to appeasement. But there is a need to see when there is an opportunity for a reconciliation for Europe, which is involving the whole of Europe, the whole of the Euro-Atlantic area, from Washington to Vladivostok. And here, what I see is not just the tragic surface of the conflict, but some of the underlying bubbles, which unfortunately from the 1980s onwards were affecting players in the region. Renewed and volatile crisis, which grew potentially from an economic financial series of crises into something which is affecting more this collective psyche. So from the BCDE, banking, currency default and employment, it's very much moving into the issues of faith and frustration and governance and hatred and armaments, the A, and armed conflict and the war. So it's very tragic to see that as for the relationship between Russia and the West, we are somewhere back to the early 1980s, potential mix of 1980s or early 1960s, where the inadmissibility of the nuclear war is not shared somehow, at least it's not coming through the statements. And there is a notion where instead of stakes being raised, we are not going down the ladder of escalation. Beyond Europe, to prevent the tragic course of history and to prevent of sleepwalking into major calamities, there is a need to be vigilant in Asia. I think it's the worst moment for someone from Europe to make this point, but yes, economic challenges are coming and they are recurring. I don't think any region, any country is free of the cyclical character of economic forces. Volatility is there. And we recall from some of the analytical works trying to decipher the origin of the First World War, that volatility, economic volatility, mixed with feelings of national pride and mixed with arms are not the best recipe. Compared to Europe, I think there might be a need to think through some of the lessons of reconciliation between France and Germany, some of the integration efforts, because there is a lot to do in terms of reconciliation, in terms of softening some of the disputes and strengthening the rule of international regulations in that area, that region as well. In terms of bubbles to spot, to prevent what I call the possibility and walking towards a war of total destruction, I think there is a need to revisit the security area itself. The security area is complex because of the context it is surrounded. So I try to make the point that compared to some of the previous decades, the combined force of economic and financial challenges, with the impact of those challenges on the collective psyche, is creating a totally new situation for weapons of mass destruction. Yes, they have been living with weapons of mass destruction for decades. It's a question of political choice whether we consider those decades as safe ones. But what is new now? 3 elements. One is that those weapons of mass destructions are still becoming more frightening. Yes, the number of armaments is coming down. Yes, certain categories are being eliminated, like chemical weapons. Yes, hopefully biological weapons are not in the arsenals anymore. At the same time, the capacity, the scientific and technological and industrial capacity in so many parts of the world is raising not just the notion of increased threat of terrorism, terrorists using loopholes of safety and security, but it's raising the possibility of those capacities at the worst juncture of those bubbles coming together, being used in a total war effort. And the third element is, besides the continued existence of weapons of mass destruction and besides science, technology, and industry, is the intersection between the revolution or revolutions which are going on in informatics, in telecommunication, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, robotics, you just name it. And a reminder of the First World War that what used to be on the horizon as the benefits of mankind became malign forces. The Mess of France mentioned all those technologies which were turned around. So these 3 elements in the context of the letter A, armaments and arms race, but in the context of a potential triple bubble, is what's making me worried about the next 100 months. As I mentioned, I would like to drop, with a lot of simplification, with a lot of corner cutting, at least 3 ideas how to deflate those bubbles, not to let them become a super bubble, not to let 50 years or more wiped out. Number 1, I think we have to reinvent what was called New Deal in the 1930s. It will not be the same one, but yes, we have the forgotten men and women, as they were called at that time in the US by President Roosevelt. In certain countries, they represent 25 or 50% of the population if I just take the unemployed young people who never had a job. So we need practically what is the equivalent of a work relief, a global work relief of the 21st century, when after 10 years soon, some of these people find a job. It's not just a job, but a goal for themselves. Together with challenges affecting women and minorities, and the other straight of unemployed. I think this is something needed in the EU proper itself, is needed in the whole of Europe, and is needed very much beyond Europe. And you might find it simplistic, but there are big challenges where we don't have the resources to address them. Sustainable development, some estimates are saying that 2 to 4% of the global GDP would be needed to address the 169 targets which were presented last year and which will be discussed this year in the autumn. Another 5 to 10% of the global GDP would be needed to tackle climate change. Sustainable security, there is a need to deploy not just money, but intellectual resources to tackle that. So on all these issues, we need not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands